Have you ever built walls so high that even love couldn't find its way in? Have you ever looked at someone every day, someone who stood right beside you and realized too late that silence had already taken what words could have saved? This is the story of Nathan Reed, a self-made millionaire who built an empire out of precision and control, but lost his peace to the quiet between words. And Elena Carter, his loyal assistant, the quiet strength behind his success, carrying her family's burdens while holding together a man who didn't know how to feel. For years, they worked side by side, bound not by contracts or confessions, but by something unspoken, a fragile trust that neither dared to name. Until one evening, at a shimmering gala in Seattle, when she danced with another man, and that single moment cracked everything Nathan thought he understood about loyalty, love, and himself. What happens when pride speaks louder than the heart, when care turns into control, and when silence becomes the loudest form of loss? If you've ever wished someone had just said what you needed to hear, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And let's begin. His assistant danced with another man, and it shattered the millionaire's walls. Have you ever built walls so high you forgot what sunlight feels like? Nathan Reed had. Before dawn touched the edges of Seattle, he was already awake. The house on Mercer Island stood quiet, wrapped in the soft blue of morning. Nathan pulled on his running shoes, the laces tied with mechanical precision, and stepped out into the cool air. The streets were empty. Only the rhythm of his feet and the faint hum of the wind kept him company. 5 miles every morning, not a step more, not a step less. It wasn't about fitness anymore. It was about control, the measured pace, the predictability, the silence. By 6:30, he returned to his home, a sleek blend of glass and steel overlooking Lake Washington. Everything in its place. Countertops gleaming, furniture untouched, air still. He prepared his breakfast like a ritual oatmeal, 1 sliced banana, and black coffee. Nothing extra. He didn't need more. He told himself that often. Across the lake, the skyline began to stir. The city looked alive, full of people chasing something money, meaning each other. Nathan had once chased those things too. He'd built Reed Dynamics from a rented garage into one of the country's top cybersecurity firms. Now he owned everything he thought he'd wanted: the power, the precision, the empire. But somewhere along the way, peace had slipped through his fingers. At 52, Nathan carried success like armor. Heavy, polished, impenetrable. He'd lost his wife nearly a decade ago, and since then, words had felt dangerous, too sharp, too easily misunderstood. Silence was safer. Silence obeyed. By 8, his car rolled into the underground garage of Reed Dynamics. The elevator doors reflected a man in a dark suit, silver watch, face unreadable. When they opened on the 42nd floor, the hum of productivity met him: keyboards, quiet footsteps, the soft hiss of espresso machines. And there she was, standing near his office with a tablet in hand. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," said Elena Carter, her voice calm but warm. "Morning, Elena." For 3 years, she had been his executive assistant, the most reliable person in his orbit. She handled everything: schedules, negotiations, even the tone of his emails. She anticipated what he needed before he said it. She didn't flinch when he grew curt, didn't chatter when silence was enough. Today she handed him a folder, quarterly report. She said, clean, color-coded, and probably terrifying. A corner of his mouth almost lifted. "Terrifyingly efficient," he murmured. Elena smiled, then moved aside as he stepped into his office. The glass walls framed the skyline beyond Seattle waking up, ferries crossing the Sound, sunlight flickering off the water. He stood there for a moment longer than usual, unsure whether it was the view or the steadiness of her presence that kept him still. There was something about her, the calm in her movements, the quiet competence that steadied a room. She didn't demand attention, yet she drew it anyway. He had seen her handle crises with grace that executives twice her age didn't possess. But Nathan also saw what others missed, the faint tiredness under her eyes. The way she sometimes pressed her phone screen a second too long before putting it away. He knew her mother was ill, though she never spoke of it. Bills, hospitals, long nights. He could sense the weight she carried but never mentioned. He wanted to offer help, but pride was a fragile thing, and he respected hers. The morning passed in orderly rhythm meetings, decisions, signatures. By noon, the boardroom filled with analysts and project leads. Charts glowed on screens, words blurred into numbers. Nathan nodded in the right places, but his mind drifted. He noticed Elena's hand moving steadily across her notepad, her neat handwriting precise as her speech. When she looked up, their eyes met for half a heartbeat long enough to make him look away. He hadn't looked at anyone that way in years, not since he'd learned how love could unmake a man faster than failure ever could. When the meeting ended, Elena gathered her papers. "Are you attending the Foundation Gala this Saturday?" she asked, her tone casual. "I suppose I have to." "You're the founder," she said with a faint smile. "People might notice if you don't show." "Would they?" Elena tilted her head. "They don't go to those events for the money or the speeches, you know. They go to remember they're still human." Her words lingered long after she left. That night, Nathan sat in his study overlooking the dark lake. The city lights shimmered like scattered thoughts across the water. He poured himself a bourbon 2 fingers, neat, and let the quiet stretch. On the desk lay the invitation Reed Foundation Annual Charity Gala. Black and gold letters glinted under the lamplight. He almost set it aside. Almost. But her voice echoed back to remember they're still human. He leaned back, staring at his own reflection in the glass. When had he stopped feeling like one somewhere across the lake? Laughter drifted from another house. The world was still alive, even if he had forgotten how to be. He looked down at the invitation again. The event felt less like an obligation and more like a test, a chance. Maybe to step into the light he'd been avoiding. Nathan exhaled slowly, the sound loud in the empty room. He picked up the invitation and set it neatly beside his glass. Maybe it was time to stop living like a locked room. Outside, a ferry glided across the water, its lights cutting through the fog. Nathan watched until it vanished, unaware that by the next weekend, the silence he'd built his life upon, the quiet empire that had kept him safe, would begin to break. Saturday evening arrived dressed in gold. Downtown Seattle shimmered beneath a drizzle that caught every streetlight like liquid glass. Inside the Rainier Art Museum, chandeliers burned softly above marble floors, and a jazz trio poured warmth into the cool air. Glasses clinked, laughter hovered at polite distances. It was the Reed Foundation Annual Charity Gala, Nathan Reed's name printed on every banner, though he felt more ghost than guest of honor. He arrived precisely at 7:30, black tuxedo immaculate, expression unreadable. The event planners greeted him with perfect smiles, Donors extended practiced hands. Photographers angled for light. Nathan nodded, said all the right words, and meant none of them. He never stayed long at these things. They felt like board meetings with sequins. A waiter passed with a tray of bourbon. He took one, neat, always neat, and drifted toward the edge of the crowd, where the music sounded softer. From there he could watch without being watched. Across the gallery, under a painting awash in blues, couples glided across the temporary dance floor. He recognized executives, senators, familiar faces wearing unfamiliar joy. He envied them in a quiet, abstract way. Then he saw her. Elena Carter entered through the side hall, shaking raindrops from her hair before stepping fully into the light. Her dress was deep navy, the color of midnight water, modest yet effortless. A silver pendant rested against her collarbone. Her auburn hair was pinned up with a few strands escaping like whispers. Nathan's hand tightened around his glass before he realized it. He had seen her every day for 3 years behind a desk, across a meeting table, framed by spreadsheets and deadlines. But not like this, not as light, not as possibility. She laughed at something the event coordinator said, and the sound carried across the room like the first note of a song he didn't know he missed. For the first time that evening, Nathan forgot the numbers, the donors, the endless calculations that usually ran behind his eyes. Evening. Mr. Reed, said Maggie Shaw, the board chair, appearing beside him. Her gray hair glimmered under the chandeliers, her smile sharp. You look like a man solving an equation no one asked for. He gave a short breath of amusement. Old habits, he said. Try a new one, she replied, tapping his glass. Maybe living. Then she slipped back into the crowd before he could answer. The jazz trio shifted tempo something smooth, romantic, just fast enough for a slow spin. Nathan's gaze found Elena again, now talking with a tall man in a tailored suit, dark hair, confident posture, a grin that felt too practiced. The man extended a hand. Elena hesitated, laughed, and took it. They moved to the dance floor. Nathan's pulse, steady for years, skipped once. The man guided her easily. She followed with a natural rhythm that surprised Nathan. He hadn't known she could dance. She seemed lighter there, alive in a way that work never allowed. The laughter he'd only glimpsed in fragments was now whole, effortless. The man leaned closer to say something. She tilted her head back, smiling up at him. Nathan looked away, his jaw tightening. He brought the bourbon to his lips, though he no longer tasted it. Across the room, 2 investors approached. He greeted them, automatically, words on autopilot, while part of his mind stayed fixed on the couple moving under the lights. Their steps were graceful, intimate without meaning to be. Or maybe they meant to. He couldn't tell, and the not knowing burned. When the song ended, polite applause fluttered through the room. The man bowed slightly. Elena curtsied with amused exaggeration. Nathan clapped once, the sound hollow against his palm. Moments later, she crossed the room, weaving through clusters of guests until she reached him. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. Didn't expect to see you this early? She teased. I'm full of surprises, he said, too dryly. Apparently, she replied, amused. That was Andrew Pike, you might remember the name. He runs A-Line Analytics now. Nathan nodded once. An old friend, college, she said. We worked on a research project together. He's in town for a few weeks. I see. He tried to make it sound like nothing. It didn't. Elena caught the edge in his tone and tilted her head. "Don't worry. He's just a friend," she said lightly. Friends often become business partners. Nathan answered before he could stop himself. Her smile thinned, the warmth fading a degree. "Not everything is a deal." "Nathan?" He said nothing. The jazz shifted again, this time faster, louder, and conversation filled the silence between them. After a moment, she excused herself to greet another donor, leaving him alone with the echo of his own restraint. Nathan moved toward the balcony. Outside, rain streaked the glass, blurring the city into watercolor. He rested a hand against the railing, the bourbon glass cold in his grip. Behind him, music swelled, laughter rippled. He could hear her voice light, genuine somewhere in the crowd, and it stung more than he wanted to admit. He had spent a decade mastering silence, building walls high enough to outlast grief. Yet one dance, one smile shared with another man had cracked them open. He told himself it was foolish, unprofessional, irrelevant. But none of those words quieted the sudden noise inside him. When the event ended, polite applause followed his closing speech, though he couldn't recall what he'd said. He posed for a few photographs, accepted compliments, shook hands. Across the hall, Elena laughed again, this time at something Andrew whispered near her ear. Nathan felt the twist in his chest, subtle but undeniable. Later, when he finally left the museum, the rain had stopped. The city smelled of wet stone and possibility. He walked to his car, shoulders squared, face unreadable to anyone who might have seen him. But inside, his thoughts refused order. For years, his world had been made of lines clear, measured, absolute. Tonight, those lines blurred. He started the engine, watching droplets race down the windshield, somewhere behind him. Music still played faintly through the glass walls. He didn't know why it felt like the sound of something beginning or breaking. Monday morning came with the gray stillness only Seattle could master. The sky hung low over the city, heavy with unfallen rain, and the reflection of clouds turned the glass towers pale and distant. Inside Reed Dynamics, the air hummed with quiet purpose, printers whirring, coffee machines sighing, voices kept low as if not to disturb the morning's calm. Nathan Reed arrived early, earlier than usual. He told himself it was habit, but the truth was, he hadn't slept. The gala still lingered in his mind like the echo of a song he couldn't turn off. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her Elena laughing under soft lights, the navy dress catching hints of gold, her hair brushing her shoulders as she turned in someone else's arms. Andrew Pike's hand on her waist, her smile open, unguarded, and for reasons he didn't want to name, it had lodged itself deep beneath his ribs. He poured himself coffee in the executive lounge, black as always, but it tasted bitterer today. He tried reading the day's reports. The numbers blurred. He reread the same paragraph twice, and still couldn't recall what it said. By 8:30, he was already in his office, pretending to work. Elena entered a few minutes later, perfectly composed, as if Saturday night hadn't happened or hadn't mattered. Her hair was neatly pinned, her tone steady, her movements precise. The same Elena, yet different. She was sunlight through glass visible, close, but unreachable. "Good morning," she said, setting his tablet on the desk. He nodded without looking up. "Morning." There was a pause, the kind that stretched just a fraction too long. Then she spoke again. Professional? Even Your first call is with the Boston investors at 9. I've already confirmed the figures for you. Good, he said. His voice was even, but his pulse wasn't. She turned to leave. Without thinking, he said, Elena? She stopped, her hand resting lightly on the door frame. Yes, he hesitated, then asked, That man, Andrew Pike, he's, what exactly, an investor? Her eyebrows lifted slightly, just enough to mark the edge in his tone. No, she said. A friend. Nathan forced a thin smile. A friend from college, you said? That's right. Must have been a memorable friendship. The words left before he could stop them too sharp, too revealing. Elena's posture changed subtle, but firm. She turned back toward him fully now, eyes calm but unyielding. Yes, it was, she said quietly. We worked together for years, before life pulled us in different directions. He helped me through some rough times. Nathan swallowed hard. I see. She tilted her head slightly, watching him. Do you? The question hung between them like a held breath. He looked away, toward the rain streaking down the glass wall behind her. I just thought, if he's looking into partnerships, it should go through the proper channels. Her lips pressed into something between a smile and a sigh. Always business first, she said softly. Don't worry. Nathan. Andrew doesn't need anything from this company. Her use of his first name startled him, not disrespectful, but intimate in a way that caught him off guard. Good, he said, forcing his tone back into order. Then we'll keep things simple, of course. And then she left, quiet heels fading down the hall, leaving a silence that felt heavier than sound. Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He told himself it was nothing, a passing irritation, professional curiosity, concern for the company's image, but the truth came creeping in. Slow and certain, he was jealous. The word burned, even in thought. Jealousy was messy, irrational, something he'd outgrown, or thought he had. He'd spent years mastering control, keeping emotions behind glass. Yet here he was, undone by a dance, a laugh, a friend from another lifetime. He set his coffee aside, suddenly restless. The office, normally his sanctuary, now felt too small, too bright. He walked to the window. Below, the city moved, cars crossing bridges, ferries cutting through gray water, people chasing their own distractions. He wondered when he had stopped allowing himself any. A knock at the door pulled him back. Elena again. Calm, efficient. She held out a folder. Updates from the marketing division, she said. I'll brief you before the call. He nodded but didn't take it. His hand hovered near hers, then dropped. Elena, he said quietly, do I make things difficult for you? She blinked. The question seemed to catch her off guard. No, she said after a moment. You make things structured, predictable. That's not the same as easy. No, she admitted. But I've never needed easy. He wanted to say something more. Something honest. I didn't like seeing you with him. But honesty had never been his strong language. So instead, he said, You're good at what you do. Thank you, she replied, though the distance in her tone was unmistakable. When she left again, the quiet returned louder now, filled with everything he hadn't said. He sat for a long time, staring at the reflection of rain sliding down the window. He thought of his late wife, Caroline, how she used to tell him he didn't need to fix everything, just feel something once in a while. He'd never understood that. Not until now. He thought of Elena laughing in another man's arms, and the ache that followed wasn't about possession. It was about presence. He had spent years depending on her without ever truly seeing her, and now that he finally did, she wasn't his to reach. He opened his laptop, pretending to work again. But the numbers made no sense. All he could think about was how easily silence turned into distance, and how quickly distance began to feel permanent. By late afternoon, the office had thinned. He stood by the window, watching the city dissolve into mist. Inside the glass, his reflection stared back composed, controlled, unshaken. But beneath it, something fragile had begun to move. He didn't know what it was yet, only that it scared him. Because if he looked too closely, he might have to name it. And naming it would mean admitting that the one thing he thought he'd buried long ago, the capacity to care, had quietly come back to life. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind Nathan Reed had once built his life around, but a silence that pressed against the walls, thick and suffocating, filling the space between words that would not come. At Reed Dynamics, everything still worked, emails were sent, meetings held, contracts signed. The machine of business moved with perfect rhythm. But underneath, something had shifted. Nathan moved through the motions like a man reading from a script he no longer believed in. His office, usually a place of clarity, now felt foreign, each decision mechanical, each conversation rehearsed. He gave orders, nodded at updates, approved reports, and yet none of it seemed to touch him. Elena was no different, at least on the surface. Her tone remained calm, her professionalism unshaken, but her eyes no longer lingered on him the way they used to when exchanging notes. And her laughter, once subtle but constant, was nowhere to be found. Their interactions had become fragments. Meeting at 10, reports ready, I'll confirm with legal, functional, safe, cold, by Wednesday. The distance between them had grown into something physical, a quiet ache that filled the air between every clipped sentence. That evening, long after most of the staff had gone home, Nathan stood by his window watching the city glow in soft rainlight. The reflection staring back at him in the glass looked older somehow. Tired. The kind of tired that came not from work, but from wanting something you no longer knew how to ask for. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. The amber light trembled in the glass as his hand hovered. Instead, he sat down, leaning back in his chair, and without warning, memory pulled him backward to another night, another silence. 10 years earlier. Caroline's voice still lived somewhere in the walls of his mind, gentle, quick to laugh, but quieter near the end. He could see her in their old kitchen barefoot, hair tied up, a faint trace of paint still on her hands from the studio. She had been working on a new series, something abstract, and she'd looked up at him as he came in from a late meeting. "You missed dinner," she'd said softly, not angry, just tired. He remembered answering with a line that sounded like care but felt like avoidance. "I'll eat later. You should rest." She had smiled then, small and sad. "That's what you always say." He hadn't understood what she meant until much later. That silence could be as sharp as cruelty. That saying nothing out of pride, or fear, or habit, could hollow out love until nothing remained. He had built their marriage on the same thing he built his empire on: control. And control, he realized too late, was just another word for distance. The last real conversation they'd had was in that kitchen. She'd told him she couldn't reach him anymore. He'd told her he was doing it all for her, and she had said, quietly, "Then why does it feel like you're never here 2 weeks later?" She was gone. A car accident on a rain-slicked highway outside Tacoma. And the last words he'd spoken to her had been practical, not loving, not human. Now, sitting alone in his office, Nathan pressed his palms together, as if he could still hold on to the sound of her voice before it faded. He had sworn, after her death, that silence would protect him. That if he didn't let anyone close, he'd never lose them. But watching Elena move through her days, steady, tired, distant, he wondered if he had simply rebuilt the same mistake, stone by careful stone. He saw the signs of exhaustion in her more clearly now, the faint tremor in her hands when she typed, the muted tone when she spoke on the phone, probably with her mother's doctor. He had overheard her once, months ago, trying to negotiate a payment plan. He hadn't meant to listen, but something about the quiet in her voice that day had stayed with him. He could have helped her easily. One call, one check. But that would have crossed the invisible line between kindness and intrusion. He had learned that offering help could sometimes feel like taking away dignity. Still, the thought wouldn't leave him. Late Thursday night, he saw her office light still on. Through the glass wall, she sat hunched over her computer, shoulders slumped, one hand pressed to her temple. On the desk beside her, a coffee gone cold, a folder marked insurance. He watched for a moment longer than he should have. Then he turned away, guilt prickling at the edges of his restraint. He told himself it wasn't his place. She was an employee, a professional, independent. She wouldn't want his pity. And yet, pity wasn't what he felt. It was something closer to recognition. The sight of someone trying to hold their world together with sheer will, and no one noticing how heavy it had become. When she finally left, she passed by his door. Their eyes met through the glass. She gave a polite nod, and he almost said anything. But habit held him silent. And she disappeared into the elevator, her reflection fading with the closing doors. Nathan exhaled, long and low. The bourbon on his desk still untouched. He reached for it now, but instead of drinking, he poured it down the sink. The clink of the empty glass echoed in the quiet office. He stood there for a long moment, watching the amber liquid swirl away. Maybe silence wasn't strength. Maybe it was just fear wearing a clean suit. Outside, the city lights blurred through rain again. He placed a hand against the cold glass, and for the first time in years, he whispered into the empty room a sound barely louder than the hum of the building. "I'm sorry." He didn't know if it was for Caroline, for Elena, or for himself. Only that it was the truest thing he'd said in a long time. Rain slicked the glass walls of Reed Dynamics that Friday morning, tracing thin silver lines down the surface like nervous handwriting. The city outside was muted, wrapped in cloud. Inside, Nathan Reed's world, his perfectly measured, ordered world, began to shift again. Not with noise, but with whispers. He arrived at 7:30, early as always. The office lights hummed low. His reflection followed him in every polished surface, controlled, immaculate, tired. He liked mornings like this, the quiet, before the machinery of the day began. But the calm didn't last. By 8, his phone buzzed. Maggie Shaw's name flashed across the screen. "Got a minute," her voice came, dry as sandpaper. "Something's come up. You'll want to see it before the board does. He frowned. Come in. A moment later, she appeared at his doorway short, sharp-eyed, unflappable. She shut the door behind her. Do you know a man named Andrew Pike? The name landed like a drop of acid. Nathan looked up slowly. I've heard it, he said evenly. He's the one from the gala. That's the one, Maggie replied. Apparently, he reached out to our partnerships division this week proposing a joint venture, data security integration between his startup and Reed Dynamics. Nathan leaned back in his chair. And it's a mess, she said flatly, dropping a folder onto his desk. Pike's company, A-Line Analytics, looks impressive on the surface clean website. Flashy investors, the usual buzzwords. But I dug deeper. There are inconsistencies in his funding sources. He's partnered before with firms now under investigation for data manipulation. Nathan flipped through the papers. The details were crisp and damning. You're saying he's a liability? I'm saying he's dangerous, Maggie corrected. And here's the part you won't like. The request for the initial meeting came from your office. He looked up. From me? No. From your assistant. The words hit harder than he expected. Elena. Maggie nodded. Her name's on the internal memo. She emailed the partnerships team, recommended Pike as a contact worth exploring. For a moment, Nathan said nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence. Maggie crossed her arms. Look, I'm not jumping to conclusions. Maybe she didn't know his background. Maybe Pike used her name to open a door. But optics matter. If this gets out, if the board even thinks someone close to you facilitated contact with a compromised vendor, it'll raise questions? Questions we don't need. Nathan's jaw tightened. Send me the correspondence. Already in your inbox, she said. I'd talk to her before this turns into gossip. When Maggie left, the silence felt heavier. Nathan sat still for a long time, staring at the folder. The neat rows of text blurred into something personal. Elena's name in the email signature looked foreign, too deliberate, too trusting. He opened the message. Andrew Pike, promising analytics partner. Might be worth exploring potential synergies. Professional, clean. The kind of language she always used, but beneath it, something in him began to twist. Why would she recommend Pike? Why not tell him first? Had he misjudged her all along? He tried to dismiss it. He wanted to. But the thought spread like ink on water, dark, slow, inevitable. By noon, the rumor had started to ripple through the upper floors. He overheard it in fragments, quiet voices in hallways, cautious tones. Elena Carter. Reed's assistant, didn't she suggest the Pike deal? That's what I heard. Maybe she's involved. Each word scraped against his nerves. When Elena walked into his office that afternoon, she looked as she always did, calm, precise, holding her tablet like a shield of order. But for the first time, he didn't see steadiness. He saw mystery, distance, possible deceit. Your afternoon briefing, she said, placing a file on his desk. He didn't look up. You know, Andrew Pike approached our partnerships division? She paused. I do now, she said carefully. And you recommended him? Yes, she said, straightening slightly. A few weeks ago. He mentioned he was developing security software. I thought it could be a potential fit. I didn't know you had a history with him. It's not history, Nathan said sharply. It's risk. The man's company has questionable ties. Her brow furrowed. I didn't know that. He cut her off. Why didn't you tell me first? She blinked, taken aback. Because it was just an introduction. That's part of my job, to identify opportunities. Opportunities? He repeated, the word tasting bitter. Do you always make those calls without consulting me? Something flickered in her eyes, hurt, quickly masked. You trust me to manage your schedule, your clients, even your press statements. I assumed you trusted my judgment on this too. His voice was low. Trust doesn't mean permission to gamble with my name. The silence that followed was long and cold. Elena's hands tightened around her tablet. If that's how you see it, I'll refrain from making any independent decisions moving forward. That would be wise. She nodded once, slowly. Understood. Then she turned to leave. Wait, he said suddenly. But when she looked back, the words he wanted, I didn't mean that. I'm just trying to protect you, refuse to come. Instead, he said nothing. She studied him for a beat longer, then said quietly, You're starting to sound like the people you used to hate. Nathan. And she walked out. When the door closed, he sat there, pulse hammering. Her words stayed behind, sharp and steady. He opened the file again, scanning the same lines over and over. It made no sense. Elena wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. And yet, what if he'd been wrong about her? The question crawled under his skin, feeding on every doubt he'd buried. He thought of her late nights, her careful tone, the way she avoided his eyes lately. Had it all been guilt strategy? He hated himself for thinking it, and hated even more that he couldn't stop. That evening, he called Maggie back. Dig deeper on Pike, he said. Every contract, every partner, every financial trail. If there's something buried, I want it found. Maggie hesitated. Nathan, don't go hunting ghosts. Sometimes suspicion creates what you fear. Do it anyway, he said quietly. I need to know. After she left, Nathan stood by the window again, watching the rain thicken. The city glowed faintly beneath storm clouds. He pressed a hand against the glass, feeling the cold bite through his skin. In the reflection, he saw a man he didn't quite recognize, one built of suspicion, not reason. The same armor that once protected him now began to corrode from the inside. He closed his eyes, hearing Caroline's voice again, the memory of her last question echoing through years of silence. Why does it feel like you're never here? And now, for the first time, he understood. Because even when he was already somewhere else, chasing certainty in a world that had never promised it. The sun was barely visible that evening, a smear of amber fighting to break through a sheet of gray clouds. Inside Reed Dynamics, the lights had begun to dim, one office after another going dark as employees clocked out and headed home. Only 2 lights remained on at the top of the 42nd floor, Nathan Reed's and Elena Carter's. For hours, silence had stretched between them like glass transparent, fragile and sharp. Nathan sat behind his desk, hands clasped, trying to focus on the report before him. But the numbers meant nothing. His thoughts kept circling back to the same point, the same question that refused to die. At last, he pushed the folder aside. Elena, he said. Across the room, she looked up from her laptop. Yes, he stood, pacing slowly toward the window, keeping his voice even. I need you to be honest with me. Did you suggest Andrew Pike to our team? Her brows knit together. But she didn't flinch. Yes, I already told you I did. He asked for an introduction. I thought it might be mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial? He repeated. For who? Her expression tightened. For the company? Nathan? For you? That's what I do. I connect opportunities that might help us. He turned toward her, his tone controlled but heavy. And you didn't think to verify who he was working with. His reputation? His record? Her voice stayed calm, though her hands trembled slightly on the laptop's edge. I checked what I could. I didn't find anything alarming. You've said yourself risk is part of innovation. This isn't innovation, Nathan said sharply. It's negligence. That stung. She drew in a slow breath, as if steadying herself. You think I'd deliberately endanger this company? He hesitated, but the silence that followed was its own answer. Something in her posture shifted. The professional calm she wore like armor began to crack. You do? She said quietly. You actually think that? Nathan rubbed a hand over his face, frustrated. I don't want to think that. But right now, I have Maggie telling me your email opened a door to a man whose business has skeletons in every file cabinet. Tell me what I'm supposed to think. Maybe you could start by asking me before assuming I had an agenda? I did ask you, he said, his voice rising. No, she shot back, her voice matching his. You accused me. The words cut through the air like a crack of thunder. They stared at each other, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but electric, heavy with everything that couldn't be said. Nathan broke it first. Softer now. You've been distant lately. Different. You don't tell me things like you used to. Her laugh came quiet and bitter. Maybe because every time I try, you find a way to turn it into a report. That's not fair. It's not, she said, stepping closer. You monitor every meeting, every contact, every conversation I have that isn't strictly about work. You think I don't notice. You think I don't feel that he took a breath, trying to regain control. But his voice cracked anyway. I'm trying to protect what we've built here. She shook her head slowly. You mean what you've built? I just happen to work inside the walls of it. Elena, no? She interrupted, the word trembling but firm. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep treating everyone like they're one mistake away from betraying you. That's not leadership. Nathan, that's fear. Her voice softened then, not in pity, but in exhaustion. And I've been afraid. Too afraid of saying the wrong thing, of stepping over one of your invisible lines. I've walked on eggshells for months, and I'm done pretending that's normal. Nathan looked at her, jaw tight, guilt creeping behind his anger. You think I don't notice the sacrifices you make, he said quietly. The hours, the pressure, your mother's health, you think I don't see it. Then why don't you ever say it? She asked. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because she was right. He saw everything. But said nothing always too late, always too carefully. The silence that followed was long and aching. Elena's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. I've defended you in rooms where people called you impossible. I believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. But I can't keep doing that if you're going to look at me like I'm a liability. Nathan swallowed hard, his throat tight. That's not what yes, it is, she said. Because it's easier for you to suspect me than to trust me. Her words hit like a slap. He turned away, staring at his reflection in the glass, the skyline behind him blurred in the fading light. Elena, he said softly, this company isn't the only thing that matters, she finished. The room fell still. The last of the sunlight caught in her hair, casting a faint halo around her face before it faded completely. Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. You're angry? I'm hurt. she corrected. There's a difference. Outside, the sky deepened to violet. The city lights blinked on, one by one, filling the reflection on the window pane. She picked up her bag, movement slow, deliberate. I'll finish the quarterly review from home, she said. You'll have it in your inbox by morning. Elena, he said again. Quieter now. Don't walk out like this. She paused by the door, hand on the handle. Then don't make it so easy to... For a second, neither of them moved. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled of storm. And then she left. The soft click of the door closing seemed louder than any shout could have been. Nathan turned back to the window, staring at his own reflection, the shape of a man framed against a city he couldn't feel anymore. He watched as the office lights dimmed around him, leaving him in a wash of blue shadows and glass. The faint trace of her perfume still lingered in the air, a ghost of something human inside his perfect machine. He thought about calling her, about apologizing, about saying something real for once. But the words wouldn't come. They never did. So instead, he sat there until night fully claimed the city. The glow of the skyline shimmered against the glass, reflecting back a man who had everything except the courage to be kind. He whispered her name once, just to hear it out loud. Elena. It dissolved into the quiet, unnoticed by anyone but him. The weekend arrived quietly, wrapped in drizzle and gray light. Nathan Reed sat alone in his penthouse office, the one overlooking Lake Washington, where the city shimmered faintly through a film of mist. He had not gone home the night before. The chair beneath him still bore the faint impression of hours of silence, hours of thinking about everything he had said and everything he hadn't. On his desk, the security report from Maggie lay open. Dozens of pages of data, code logs, and timestamps the anatomy of a betrayal he had been so desperate to confirm. He'd expected to find proof of Elena's carelessness, something that would justify his anger. Instead, what he found hollowed him out. Andrew Pike's name appeared again and again: false IP addresses, shell transactions, encrypted correspondences bouncing through servers in Delaware and Singapore. The more he read, the clearer it became. Pike wasn't here for partnership. He was here for access. And Elena, she'd been nothing but a door he could use. Nathan rubbed his temple, guilt pulsing behind his eyes. He closed the folder, unable to read more. The paper crackled under his hand like something alive, accusing. Maggie had been right. Sometimes suspicion creates what you fear. He had looked at the one person who had never failed him and made her feel like an enemy. He stood and walked to the window. The lake stretched out below, silver and still, mirroring the clouds. For a long time, he just watched the rain form ripples across the glass. Then, unbidden, a memory rose: Elena's first interview, 3 years ago. He had been running late that morning, another endless day of meetings and numbers. The receptionist had ushered her in 35 then, professional but calm, her dark hair tied back, her suit navy, and neat but not new. She had sat down without fidgeting, without trying to impress. "You've already gone through 4 assistants this year," she had said lightly. "That tells me the problem isn't the job description." He'd looked up, intrigued. "And what do you think the problem is, Ms. Carter?" "People assume they can read you," she said. "But you communicate in subtext timing, silence, detail. You want someone who speaks that language. not someone who talks over it. He remembered the way she'd said it not as a challenge, but as truth. He had hired her on the spot, and she had been right. For 3 years. She'd managed not just his time, but his peace. She understood the pauses between his words, the reasons behind his silences. She made things function that he hadn't realized were broken. Until now. He turned back to his desk, his reflection faint in the glass, a man who had once believed silence equaled strength. But now, all he saw was isolation. He sat, opened his laptop, and stared at a blank email screen. His fingers hovered over the keys. Elena, he typed. The name itself hurt to write. He paused, then continued. I owe you an apology. I should have trusted you, and I should have asked before assuming the worst. Pike isn't who he said he was. You were right, I was wrong. He stopped again, reading the words. Too formal. Too easy. He deleted the paragraph and started over. You once told me people go to galas to remember they're still human. I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant. I forgot that trust isn't a calculation, it's a choice. You gave me that choice every day, and I threw it away the first moment it scared me. His hands froze. The cursor blinked steady. Patient, waiting for him to say more. I miss talking to you, he added, almost whispering the words aloud. Not about work, about anything. He sat back. For a moment, the apology felt real, fragile, alive. Then he saw himself in the reflection of the dark screen gray hair. Tired eyes. A man accustomed to control and doubt crept in. What if she didn't want to hear from him? What if the damage was done? What if words... Once again came too late. He closed the laptop, unsent. The next morning, Nathan arrived at the office before sunrise. The halls were empty, lights low. He passed Elena's desk, the same organized surface she'd left behind on Friday evening. Her coffee mug still sat there, clean but waiting. He picked it up, turned it in his hand, then set it back exactly as it was. Inside his office, he opened the blinds. The city was still waking, streetlights fading into dawn. He thought of Caroline again, her laughter, her voice on that last morning. You don't have to fix everything, Nathan. Sometimes, you just have to say something. He hadn't listened then. He wasn't sure he knew how now. By mid-morning, Maggie stopped by with another update. It confirmed the breach, she said, handing him a document. It traces back to Pike's servers. Your assistant's credentials were cloned. She's clean. Nathan took the file but didn't open it. He nodded once. Thank you. Maggie studied him a moment longer. You should tell her that yourself, she said. She's working remotely today, he replied quietly. Then wait until tomorrow, Maggie said, turning to leave. Just don't wait too long. When she was gone, the silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. Nathan opened the file just to see her name again. Elena Carter. Cleared. 3 words. He traced them with his thumb, as if he could rewrite the week with that gesture. He thought about the way she looked when she left the hurt behind her calm. He thought about the trust in her voice the first time she said, You can depend on me? He'd depended on her. Yes, but never allowed her to depend on him. That realization hurt more than any accusation could have. He turned back to the window, the city gleaming faintly under the pale morning light. He wished, for once, he could say the right thing before it was too late. The email draft still waited in his inbox, unfinished. He hovered over the send button one last time, then closed the lid again. Not yet. He told himself he'd talk to her in person tomorrow, maybe, when the timing was better, when the words didn't feel like confession. But deep down, he knew the timing would never be better, and the words he feared most were the only ones that could save him. The hospital always smelled faintly of antiseptic and tired hope. Elena Carter sat beside her mother's bed, fingers curled loosely around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. The monitor beside the bed beeped in a soft, patient rhythm, the sound of life, continuing. Just barely. It was close to midnight. Rain whispered against the window, and the world outside glowed with the dim orange of streetlights. Inside, everything felt still, except for the ache behind her eyes. Diana Carter slept fitfully, her breathing shallow but steady. The doctors had said she was stable, that word people used when they meant fragile. Elena brushed a stray strand of gray hair from her mother's forehead. The gesture was automatic, comforting, almost childlike. She whispered softly, "It's okay, Mom." Just rest. Her voice cracked on the last word. The past week had felt like living underwater, muted, heavy, distorted. She had tried to move through it with professionalism, with the same composure she wore to the office every day. But composure was armor, and armor was heavy. Nathan's words still echoed in her head, "Trust doesn't mean permission to gamble with my name." He hadn't yelled. He hadn't needed to. His voice cold, precise, disappointed had done the job. She had told herself she didn't care, that he was her boss, not her friend, that what he thought of her didn't matter. But that was a lie. And she knew it. Because she had admired him. Because she had believed that beneath all his control, there was goodness. And because, stupidly, she had started to trust that goodness, to see something human behind the sharp edges of power. She set the cup down, rubbed her eyes. Across the room, her phone buzzed. A text from Andrew Pike. "Andrew, I heard Reed's team is asking questions. You okay?" She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then another message came. "Andrew, you know I never meant to drag you into this. Let me explain." Her jaw tightened. She typed one word, "Don't," and then deleted it before sending. Instead, she locked the phone and slid it into her bag. She didn't need his apologies, and she didn't want to hear his excuses. What she wanted, what she couldn't admit even to herself, was for Nathan to have believed her when she'd said she hadn't known. For him to have looked at her the way he used to, with trust, with quiet respect, with that faint, unspoken connection that had always made the long hours bearable. She pressed her palms to her eyes, breathing deeply. "Why does goodness have to feel like guilt?" she whispered. "Maybe because the world punished sincerity more than deceit." When her mother stirred, she sat up again, smoothing the blanket gently. Diana's eyes opened halfway, cloudy with medication. "You're still here?" she murmured. "Where else would I be?" Elena said softly. Her mother smiled faintly. "You work too hard, sweetheart. Don't let them take your kindness and make it a weakness." Elena swallowed hard. "I'll try." But she didn't believe it. Not tonight. She stayed until dawn, until the first gray light crept through the blinds. When the nurse came in to check vitals, Elena gathered her things and kissed her mother's forehead. "Get some rest." "Okay," she said. The nurse gave her a tired smile. "You too, honey." By the time she reached the Reed Dynamics building, The city had fully woken. The lobby gleamed under bright lights, the usual hum of conversation echoing off marble and glass. Elena felt like a ghost walking among the living. She stopped at the cafe in the lobby for a coffee she didn't really want, then took the elevator up. The doors opened onto familiar hallways, her second home for years. Except now, every step felt heavier. When she reached her desk, she saw it immediately, the envelope. Plain, white, sitting neatly in the center of her workspace, her name printed across the front. She picked it up slowly, her stomach tightening. Inside was a formal notice. Subject internal review, data partnership inquiry, per company policy. All staff involved in external introductions under review will be interviewed by compliance. Her eyes froze on the signature line. Nathan Reed, CEO. She read it twice, as if it might change. Her throat burned. He had ordered it himself. Not HR, not legal, him. Her hands trembled as she lowered the letter. Around her. The office buzzed with morning energy phones ringing, keyboards clattering, people greeting each other with practiced warmth. No one noticed the woman standing perfectly still at her desk, holding a piece of paper that felt heavier than stone. For a long time, she just stood there, trying to breathe. She remembered the way he'd looked at her the day they met, sharp but curious, as if he saw something valuable in her. She remembered the small moments, the quiet humor, the rare but real smiles, the trust that had once been mutual. And now, all she could see was the distance between them, measured, deliberate, and final. A voice broke through her thoughts. Elena, it was Maggie Shaw, standing a few feet away, holding a folder. The older woman's eyes softened when she saw the letter. "I didn't want you to find out like that," she said quietly. "So it's true?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Maggie hesitated. "He requested the review before the new evidence came in. He doesn't know it's been resolved yet?" Elena blinked, confusion and disbelief crossing her face. "Resolved Pike was the problem," Maggie said. "Not you." It traced everything back to him. "Your credentials were cloned." Elena let out a shaky breath, part relief, part heartbreak. "Then why hasn't he told me?" "Because Nathan Reed doesn't know how to apologize?" Maggie said softly. "He only knows how to fix things after they break." Elena's chest tightened. Maybe that's worse. Maggie gave a small nod, sympathy in her eyes. "Sometimes it is." Elena managed a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for telling me." Maggie squeezed her shoulder gently. "Don't let this change who you are." But it already had. When Maggie left, Elena sat down, her fingers tracing the edge of the letter. She thought about deleting her emails, about packing her things, about walking out without a word. But she didn't. Instead, she turned on her computer and began typing her resignation draft, not as anger, not as revenge, but as self-preservation. She wrote slowly, choosing every word carefully. "Mr. Reed, I've respected this company and the work we've done, but I can't continue under the shadow of mistrust. This decision is about peace, not pride. I hope one day you'll understand the difference." She didn't send it yet. She just saved it, sitting there for a long while, staring at the cursor, blinking in quiet rhythm. Outside, sunlight finally broke through the clouds, a soft, uncertain light spilling across her desk. It made the letter gleam, and for the first time, she realized the worst kind of betrayal wasn't what others did to you. It was when someone you believed in made you doubt your own worth. The rain had returned steady, relentless, washing the glass walls of Reed Dynamics in streaks of gray. The sky above Seattle hung low, pressing the city into a somber kind of quiet. Inside, Nathan Reed sat behind his desk, the storm outside nothing compared to the one inside his chest. He had spent the morning going over every file, every report. Everything pointed to the same truth: Andrew Pike had orchestrated the breach, not Elena. Her credentials had been cloned, her name used without consent. It should have brought relief. Instead, it brought dread, because now he had to face what he'd done to her. When the intercom buzzed, he startled slightly. "Ms. Carter is here," Grace said. Nathan hesitated. "Send her in." The door opened quietly. Elena stepped inside, poised, calm, but her eyes carried fatigue that went deeper than sleepless nights. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Nathan rose. "Yes. Sit down. Please." "I'd rather stand," she replied. Her tone was polite but distant. He nodded. "Nervous. I owe you an explanation." "That would be a first," she said softly. He swallowed, ignoring the sting. "It's about Pike. The IT team traced the data breach back to him. He used your credentials to gain access." Her expression didn't change right away. Then, slowly, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean, my credentials?" "They were cloned. He made it appear as though you were the source of the access. I found the report last night." Elena stared at him, stunned. "So you knew it wasn't me?" "I confirmed it this morning." Her voice dropped. "Cold?" "And when exactly were you planning to tell me that Nathan stepped closer?" You weren't," she said, "cutting him off. You were just going to keep sitting in this office, pretending that the woman who built half your world was disposable?" "That's not true," he said quickly. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "Then tell me what is true, Nathan. Tell me why I had to find out from a compliance letter that you ordered an investigation into me. Why you let me walk around this building like a suspect in my own life." His jaw clenched. "I was trying to protect the company." "From me?" He hesitated just long enough to answer her question without words. The air between them thickened. "You think I did this?" she said slowly, disbelief giving way to pain. "After everything, I didn't want to think that," he said. "But I had to consider every angle." "You had to consider me," she shot back. "That's what trust means, Nathan. You consider the person you know before the story you fear." Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "You can calculate markets, forecast risks, read every hidden variable, but you can't see what's right in front of you." "Elena, no," she said, voice rising. "I've been by your side for 3 years. I've defended you, sacrificed time with my family, slept in that office during mergers, missed holidays, all because I believed in you. And you couldn't even give me the courtesy of belief in return." Her hands shook. "You're not protecting anything, Nathan. You're controlling it. You build these walls so no one can hurt you, and then you stand inside them wondering why you're alone." He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. "It's not that simple." "It is," she said, eyes glistening. "You think being untouchable makes you strong, but it just makes you unreachable." Her words landed like stones, precise, true, merciless. Nathan felt his chest tighten, words spilling before he could stop them. "You don't understand. Elena, I did what I did because I care about you." She froze. What he took a step closer, desperate now. I've been covering your mother's hospital bills. The treatments, the ones not covered by insurance, I've been paying for them." The silence that followed was brutal. Elena stared at him, face pale. "You what?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't want to burden you. I knew how much pressure you were under. It was the only way I could help without making things harder." Her expression cracked not from gratitude, but from something deeper, rawer. "You paid for my mother's care," she repeated. "Without telling me, without even asking I was trying to help," he said, his voice low. "You were drowning and you decided to save me." Her tone cut through him like glass. "You, of all people, decided what I needed," he faltered. "It wasn't about control. It's always about control with you," she said, shaking her head. "Even your kindness comes with strings I didn't ask for." "Elena, please," he murmured. "I just didn't want you to feel obligated." "Obligated?" She gave a hollow laugh. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? You think I couldn't take care of my own mother, that I needed you to fix me?" He stepped closer, voice breaking. "That's not what I meant." "But it's what you did," she whispered. She looked at him, then really looked. The man she'd once trusted without question stood before her, stripped of his poise, his power. Just a man brilliant, frightened, and utterly lost. "You wanted to protect me," she said softly, "but you never once treated me as an equal. You see the world in transactions, even love is a ledger for you. That's not fair. It's true," she said simply. The silence that followed felt endless. The rain beat harder against the glass. She turned toward the door, voice trembling but firm. "You've mistaken care for control, Nathan, and you've mistaken silence for strength. But all it's ever been is fear." "Elena," he started, but she didn't stop. "I can forgive mistakes," she said, hand on the door. "But I can't forgive being turned into one." The words landed like a closing verdict. She opened the door, paused once, as if searching for the right ending. But none came. Then she left. The door clicked shut. Nathan stood frozen, the sound of rain filling the room. On his desk, the folder of evidence lay, open pages fluttering slightly from the draft that followed her out. Her name appeared again and again across the reports, but now it looked different. Not as an entry, not as data, as a wound. He sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. He wanted to chase her, to tell her that he hadn't meant to hurt her, that everything he'd done came from a place he couldn't even name. But what could he say? That love had turned into fear, that fear had turned into control. Outside, thunder rolled over the city low, distant, inevitable. Inside, Nathan whispered to no one, "I didn't mean to lose you." The storm answered back with silence. The night settled over Mercer Island like a quiet confession, heavy clouds rolling in from the sound, rain threading softly against the windows. Nathan Reed sat in the half-dark of his study, surrounded by the hum of his own solitude. The house was too large, too still. The kind of silence that used to comfort him now felt like punishment. He hadn't turned on the lights. The only glow came from the desk lamp, casting a small, golden circle over a scattered mess of papers, reports, receipts, and old emails. He hadn't planned to go through them. He just couldn't stop. Elena's name appeared again and again in his inbox. Hundreds of small notes, reminder, investor call at 9 a.m. Your flight's been moved up an hour. Don't forget to eat lunch before the board meeting. You always forget. He scrolled through them slowly, each one landing like a weight in his chest, Every message was efficient, professional, but between the lines, there was warmth the kind he'd taken for granted. He clicked on one from a year ago. Subject, for what it's worth. You're right about people being unpredictable, but that's what makes them worth the risk. He read it twice, maybe 3 times. She had always understood the very thing he feared most. He closed the laptop, leaned back in his chair, and rubbed his eyes. The rain outside thickened, hitting the glass with a soft, rhythmic persistence. It sounded almost like someone knocking patient, relentless. On the shelf behind him sat a folder labeled Carter Family Trust. He had created it quietly, almost impulsively, one late night 2 years ago after overhearing Elena on the phone, trying not to cry while arguing with a billing office about her mother's treatment costs. At the time, he told himself it was practical a way to retain his best assistant by easing her burdens. But even then, he knew that wasn't the truth. It wasn't strategy. It was care. And it terrified him. He reached for the folder now, opening it slowly. Inside were the receipts transfers, invoices, payment confirmations from the hospital. Everyone stamped anonymous donor, but there it was, his signature buried deep in the authorization forms. It looked cold and professional, nothing like the intent behind it. He stared at it until the words blurred. Then, quietly, he said, "I thought silence was safety, but it became my prison." The sound of his own voice startled him. It had been so long since he'd heard it in this house, the human sound of regret. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "I wanted to do right by you," he whispered to the empty room, as if she could somehow hear him. "But I didn't understand what right meant." He reached for a pen. Not the sleek silver one he used for contracts. This one was old, heavy, the kind that forced you to mean every word you wrote. He pulled a sheet of parchment from the drawer. For the first time in years, he began to write slowly, carefully, by hand. Elena. If you're reading this, it means I finally stopped hiding behind the comfort of silence. I've spent my life believing that control kept things from falling apart, but it also kept me from ever letting anything real begin. You were never just an employee. You were the rhythm that steadied my chaos, the voice that reminded me to breathe when all I could hear was noise. I paid for your mother's care because I wanted to help, but the truth is, I was helping myself. I wanted to feel like a good man without ever having to say it out loud. I thought giving would protect me from needing. It didn't. It just built another wall between us. I thought silence was safety, but it became my prison. I see now that love, the real kind, isn't about saving or solving. It's about seeing. You saw me, Elena, even when I was impossible to see, and I failed to return that grace when it mattered most. I can't ask for forgiveness. That would be another form of taking. But I can say thank you for your patience, your strength, and the lesson you never meant to teach me. You once said that people go to galas to remember they're still human. I think that night, watching you dance, was the first time I wanted to be one again. Nathan. When he finished, he stared at the words for a long time. The ink glistened wet under the lamplight, as if refusing to dry, refusing to be permanent. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an envelope. On the front, he wrote her name in the same deliberate hand, Elena Carter. He placed it beside her old mug, the one she'd left in his office. It still had a faint ring at the bottom from the last coffee she drank there. Nathan leaned back, the exhaustion finally settling in. For once, There was no spreadsheet to fix, no strategy to polish, just the stillness of truth, the weight of being human again. He closed his eyes. He thought of her laughter, soft, unguarded, rare. He thought of her strength, her quiet defiance, the way she never raised her voice even when the world demanded it. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small, and somehow that felt like relief. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and clean. He stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the water. Mercer Island shimmered faintly beneath a veil of fog, the lights of Seattle flickering across the lake like distant promises. Nathan whispered into the glass, "Tomorrow. I'll tell her tomorrow." He knew tomorrow might never come. But tonight, for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what he felt. He turned off the lamp, leaving the letter in the dark, one small light left burning inside him, where silence used to live. The boardroom of Reed Dynamics had never felt so cold. The long glass table gleamed beneath the overhead lights, its reflection slicing through the room like a mirror of judgment. Outside, Seattle's skyline glimmered behind a curtain of gray. Inside, tension hummed like static. 11 board members sat in their places, papers spread neatly before them, murmuring among themselves. At the head of the table stood Nathan Reed, tie perfectly knotted, expression unreadable, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled slightly as he set his notes down. Across from him, Andrew Pike leaned back in his chair, every bit the picture of charm and control. He wore confidence like cologne, thick and suffocating. The chairwoman, Evelyn Rourke, cleared her throat. "Let's come to order. Mr. Pike, you requested to address the board regarding recent discrepancies." Andrew smiled. "Yes, thank you, Ms. Rourke. I think it's important for everyone here to be aware of potential internal vulnerabilities, particularly those connected to your data access protocols." He paused, glancing toward the empty seat that should have been Elena's. Certain individuals, though loyal, may have exercised poor judgment in their external associations. A murmur rippled through the room. Nathan's jaw tightened. He let him finish. Andrew continued smoothly. "It's unfortunate, really. I've always admired Miss Carter's professionalism. But when personal ties interfere with corporate discretion, the line between competence and compromise becomes blurred." That was enough. Nathan rose, his chair scraping back softly against the polished floor. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Pike," he said evenly. "The line has been blurred, but not by her." The room stilled. Evelyn looked over her glasses. "Mr. Reed, are you suggesting I'm not suggesting?" Nathan said, his voice gaining weight. "I'm confirming." He pressed a button on the remote, and the screen behind him flickered to life rows of digital logs, IP addresses, timestamps. 2 weeks ago, our IT division detected an unauthorized data breach during an external meeting. The credentials used belonged to my assistant, Elena Carter. At the time, it appeared to be an internal failure. He turned toward Andrew. "But after further investigation, we traced those credentials back to your servers, your encrypted connection, your company's domain." Andrew's smirk faltered. Nathan's tone stayed calm, almost clinical. "You cloned her access credentials, Andrew. You used her trust and mine to infiltrate this company's system under the guise of partnership. And when you were caught, you did what cowards always do." He took a breath. "You blamed the innocent." Gasps rippled around the table. Evelyn leaned forward. "Mr. Pike, Is this true? Andrew's easy grin returned, though it looked strained now. That's a serious accusation. Nathan? You can't just... I can. Nathan interrupted, his voice steady. Because I have proof. He nodded toward Maggie Shaw, who rose from her seat at the far end of the table. Holding a folder, "These are the IT forensics reports," she said, handing copies to the board members, signed by 2 independent analysts. Every digital trace points back to Pike's operation. As the papers circulated, the sound of rustling filled the room like wind through leaves. Andrew's confidence began to crack. This is absurd. Fabricated fabrication requires creativity, Maggie said dryly. You weren't that clever. The board members exchanged looks. Evelyn Rourke leaned back in her chair, her voice firm. Mr. Pike, I think you should excuse yourself. We'll be contacting legal. Andrew stood abruptly, his chair toppling backward. This isn't over, he hissed. Nathan's gaze didn't waver. It is for you. Pike stormed out, the echo of his footsteps fading down the corridor. When the door closed, the silence that followed was heavy but different. The kind of silence that waits for truth. Nathan took a slow breath. Before we continue, he said, his tone quieter now, there's something else I need to address. Every head turned toward him. He looked down at the papers in front of him, his notes. His script then pushed them aside. For 3 years, Elena Carter has been my assistant, my advisor, and the backbone of this company. Every success we've had, every deal, every milestone carries her fingerprint somewhere on it. She's the most dedicated person I've ever worked with. He hesitated. The words were harder to say than he expected. And I failed her. A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. I authorized an internal investigation into her conduct when Pike's breach first came to light. Nathan continued. I let suspicion outweigh trust. I let fear dictate my judgment. That's on me? His voice wavered slightly, but he didn't stop. And there's one more thing. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder, the one he'd taken from his study the night before. Over the past 2 years, Reed Dynamics has quietly funded a medical assistance trust for employees with family health crises. One of those beneficiaries was Elena Carter's mother. He paused, looking around the room. I approved those payments personally. I did it anonymously, without her knowledge. It wasn't a company expense, it was mine. Murmurs rippled through the room again. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. Why reveal this now? Because it matters, he said simply. I wanted to help her. But I did it wrong. I turned care into control. I tried to fix what wasn't mine to fix. He exhaled, steadying himself. This company was built on precision, on numbers and logic. But people aren't data. They're messy, human. And if we forget that, we lose everything that makes this worth building. He looked at the board not as subordinates, but as equals. I take full responsibility for the breach, the mistrust, and the consequences. If you believe my leadership compromised our values, you can vote me out. But if you still believe integrity means facing our failures, then stand with me now. The room fell silent again. Then Maggie Shaw, calm as ever, stood. For the record, she said, Nathan Reed didn't have to expose any of this. He could have buried it, blamed someone else, walked away clean. Instead, he came here and told you the truth. That's what leadership looks like. Evelyn studied Nathan for a long moment. Mr. Reed, she said finally, I've served on this board for 20 years. I've seen arrogance dressed up as confidence and greed disguised as innovation. But humility, that's rare. She nodded once. There will be no vote today. Relief swept through the room like a slow exhale. Nathan closed his eyes for a brief second. Not victory, something quieter, truer. He gathered his papers, ready to leave, when Evelyn added softly, "And Nathan, tell her. Whatever it is you didn't say, tell her." He met her gaze and nodded. "I intend to." As he stepped out of the boardroom, the rain had stopped. The air smelled different, cleaner, sharper, alive. Down the hall, through the glass walls, he saw Elena standing by the elevators. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was holding something, a sealed envelope. Their eyes met through the glass, and in that instant, Nathan knew the real reckoning wasn't what had happened in that room. It was what would happen next. The office was nearly empty that evening, the kind of stillness that only happens after endings. The hum of the fluorescent lights had softened, the rhythm of typing and footsteps replaced by the faint whisper of the HVAC through the vents. The world outside Reed Dynamics glowed with the pale light of early dusk. Elena Carter stepped out of the elevator, the sound of her heels echoing in the empty corridor. She hadn't planned to come back so soon, but there were things she needed to collect. Things she couldn't let someone else pack away: her notebooks, her favorite pen, a framed photo of her mother, smiling despite the hospital gown. Her desk waited exactly as she'd left it, clean, orderly, untouched, almost, because sitting right in the center was an envelope ivory paper, her name written in Nathan Reed's handwriting. For a long time, she just stared at it. No seal, no company letterhead, just her name, written carefully, almost reverently. Her heart clenched. She thought about leaving it there, walking away and never opening it, letting that moment remain sealed forever. But something inside her, quiet and unfinished, told her she needed to know. She sat down slowly, the chair creaking beneath her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the envelope and slid her thumb under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. His handwriting filled the page, precise, steady, but softer than she remembered. She unfolded it. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means I finally stopped hiding behind the comfort of silence. I've spent my life believing that control kept things from falling apart, but it also kept me from ever letting anything real begin. You were never just an employee. You were the rhythm that steadied my chaos, the voice that reminded me to breathe when all I could hear was noise. I paid for your mother's care because I wanted to help, but the truth is, I was helping myself. I wanted to feel like a good man without ever having to say it out loud. I thought giving would protect me from needing. It didn't. It just built another wall between us. I thought silence was safety, but it became my prison. I see now that love, the real kind, isn't about saving or solving. It's about seeing. You saw me, Elena, even when I was impossible to see, and I failed to return that grace when it mattered most. I can't ask for forgiveness. That would be another form of taking. But I can say thank you for your patience, your strength, and the lesson you never meant to teach me. You once said that people go to galas to remember they're still human. I think that night, watching you dance, was the first time I wanted to be one again. Nathan. She read it once, twice, then a third time, slower each time, as if trying to memorize the shape of every word. Her chest tightened, breath catching somewhere between a sob and a sigh. tears came quietly, unexpected, rolling down her cheeks without resistance. They weren't angry tears. Not anymore. They were the kind that come when pain finally finds its ending. For a while, she just sat there, letter trembling slightly in her hands, the hum of the city faint beyond the glass. His words lingered in the air like music, soft and unfinished. Love isn't about fixing someone. It's about seeing them. She whispered the line under her breath. It's about seeing them. And suddenly, she saw him, not the CEO, not the man who wielded power like a shield, but the one who'd finally stepped out from behind his silence, flawed, human, trying. She smiled, faintly, sad, but real. When she stood, she didn't rush. She moved slowly, almost ceremoniously. She picked up her belongings one by one, the notebook, the photo of her mother, the small succulent plant she'd kept by the window. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she slipped the letter into her bag, not to forget him, but to remember the truth of what they'd both learned. She took one last look around the office, the glass walls, the neat desks, the faint reflection of the skyline in the windows. It had been more than a workplace. For 3 years, it had been the space where she learned how far patience could stretch before it broke, and how even broken things could be mended with honesty. As she turned toward the door, Maggie Shaw appeared in the hallway. The older woman's expression softened when she saw her. "You found it?" Maggie said quietly. Elena nodded, holding her bag close. "He left it for me." Maggie tilted her head. "You read it?" "Yes." And Elena smiled again, her voice gentle. It hurt, but it also healed. Maggie stepped closer, her gaze kind. "He's trying. You know, maybe not perfectly, but honestly." "I know," Elena said. "And that's enough." Maggie nodded approvingly. "Sometimes, that's all it takes." They stood there for a long moment, two women who had seen the cost of pride in men who meant well, and the beauty that came when meaning well turned into understanding. As Elena walked away, the city lights caught the faint shimmer of tears still on her face. But there was something else there too, a steadiness, a quiet peace that hadn't been there before. She paused at the elevator, pressing the button behind her. The office glowed softly and the reflection empty, waiting, no longer haunted. The doors slid open with a soft chime. Before stepping in, she looked back one last time. Her desk, his office beyond it, the place where words were finally spoken after too many years of silence. She whispered, barely audible, "Thank you, Nathan." Then she stepped into the elevator, and the doors closed gently around her. Outside, night had fallen completely. The rain had stopped. The streets of Seattle shimmered with reflections of streetlights on wet pavement. As she walked toward her car, she felt the weight of the letter against her chest, not heavy, but grounding. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether forgiveness would ever become friendship again, whether trust could be rebuilt. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of not knowing. Because sometimes closure isn't a door closing, it's a window opening to air that finally feels clean. She slipped the letter out once more before getting in her car. The paper felt warm from her touch, alive with something fragile and true. Love isn't about fixing someone, she murmured again. It's about seeing them. And as she drove away, the city lights blurred into soft gold and silver like forgiveness reflected on glass. 2 years had passed, though sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Seattle's skyline shimmered in the distance, a mosaic of light reflecting off the calm waters of Lake Washington. The grand hall of the Reed Foundation Gala for Caregivers glowed with soft golds and silvers, candlelight dancing on glass, laughter mingling with the low hum of a jazz quartet. Nathan Reed stood by the large window overlooking the city, his posture relaxed, a glass of sparkling water in hand. Not bourbon, not anymore. The tuxedo fit the same, but the man wearing it no longer needed armor. His face carried the same strength, but softened by timelines of stress replaced by those carved from thought, humility, and quiet peace. He had learned, finally, to breathe. Around him, guests mingled: philanthropists, community workers, doctors, and families whose lives the foundation had touched. The Reed Foundation for Caregivers had become his redemption project scholarships for those caring for sick or aging loved ones, grants for medical students from underserved communities, a legacy not of control, but of compassion. When the MC introduced him, the applause was kind, not thunderous, the kind of applause reserved for a man respected, not feared. Nathan stepped up to the podium, setting his notes aside. 2 years ago, he began. Voice steady but rich with feeling. This company faced questions about trust, leadership, and what it means to take care of others. I realized something then that changed me. Caregiving isn't just about giving. It's about seeing. He paused, letting the silence hold. My mother used to tell me, you can't fix what people feel, but you can stand next to them while they feel it. That's what this foundation is about, standing beside those who carry others through their hardest days. He looked out at the crowd not to impress, but to connect. Tonight, we honor them not because they ask for it, but because they never do. The audience rose in quiet applause. Nathan nodded once, grateful, then stepped down. He didn't linger on stage. The man who once lived for control now found peace in stepping aside. He moved through the crowd easily, shaking hands, smiling genuinely, not the forced smile of the corporate world, but one shaped by stillness and sincerity. And then, in the far corner of the room, he saw her, Elena Carter. She stood by one of the art installations, a sculpture of glass and light, glowing like frozen water. Her dress was simple, elegant, navy blue, again a shade that felt like continuity, not coincidence. Her hair was shorter now, her expression calmer, wiser. She was talking with a small group of attendees, laughing quietly. Nathan froze for a moment, the room fading around him. It wasn't the kind of shock that stings, it was something gentler, like recognition, like coming home. When she turned and saw him, the world seemed to pause between heartbeats. For a moment, neither moved. Then she smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The same smile that used to mean you're forgiven without saying it. Nathan walked toward her, slow but sure. Elena, he said softly. Nathan, she replied, her voice steady but warm. You clean up well? He chuckled, trying to keep up with the guests of honor. She raised an eyebrow. You're the guest of honor. From what I heard. He shook his head. Not tonight. The caregivers are... That sounds like you, she said. It didn't... He admitted. Not before. Her eyes softened. It does now. They stood together for a moment, watching the crowd. The jazz music drifted through the room, gentle piano, brushed cymbals, a melody that seemed to move slower, easier, with age. I didn't know you'd be here, Nathan said. I was invited by the foundation, Elena replied. One of my clients is partnering with you for the caregiver scholarships. I do consulting now, small nonprofits. Healthcare initiatives. That sounds right, he said, smiling, always taking care of others. She tilted her head. And you still trying to fix the world one silent apology at a time. He laughed softly. Not anymore. I'm learning to talk first. She smiled again. And the distance that had lived between them for years began to dissolve. I read about the foundation. She said, it's good work. Nathan, real work? He nodded. It's what I should have done a long time ago. She looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, you found your way? He met her gaze. I had a good teacher. A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Surprise. Maybe gratitude. She glanced down at the glass sculpture beside them. The light refracted across her face, painting her features in soft amber. Do you ever think about that night, she asked, voice low. The gala, he asked, every day for a while. Then, less. Now, just enough. And now, he said, smiling faintly. I remember the light more than the silence. They both laughed quietly, the sound easy, unforced. For a while, they just stood there, watching the donors and students mingling people who might never know the story that had made this night possible. Elena turned to him again. You wrote me a letter, she said softly. He nodded. I did? I kept it? She said. He looked down, humbled. I'm glad. It reminded me, she continued, that even broken people can build something beautiful when they finally learn how to see. Nathan's throat tightened, but he managed a smile. You did that for me. I think we did it for each other, she replied. There was no apology, no grand gesture, just understanding. And in that small space between them, there was peace. The band shifted to a softer tune, something hopeful, almost like a waltz. Couples began moving to the dance floor, laughter and music threading through the room. Nathan glanced at her, a quiet question in his eyes. She hesitated, then smiled. You really want to risk another gala dance, Mr. Read only if you lead, he said. She laughed, shaking her head, but she didn't walk away. Instead, they stood together, side by side. As the music swelled, not dancing, but moving with the rhythm of something unspoken, something healed. And for the first time, silence wasn't an absence between them. It was harmony. Later, as the night ended, Elena slipped out before the final toast. Nathan watched her go, a soft smile lingering. She turned at the door, just once, and their eyes met again, that wordless exchange that had always said more than conversation ever could. When she was gone, Maggie came up beside him. You look lighter, she said. I am, he replied. She's proud of you. You know? I hope so. Maggie smiled. You don't need to hope, Nathan. You just need to keep seeing. He nodded, watching the lights shimmer across the glass sculpture. The reflections merged gold and blue, blending into something new. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer to seeing. And for the first time in years, he meant every word. Have you ever stood before a window at night and seen your own reflection more clearly than the world beyond it? That's where Nathan Reed found himself one evening, long after the lights had faded from the gala, long after the last glass had been cleared from the tables. The city stretched beneath him, a constellation of gold and silver lights mirrored in the dark water of Lake Washington. And in that reflection, he saw the man he had once been, precise, silent, afraid of needing anyone. Then, beyond the glass, he saw the man he had become, still quiet, still deliberate, but open, human. He smiled faintly, For years, he had thought strength meant never bending, but it turned out strength was knowing when to bow to humility, to honesty, to love. Behind him, the sound of faint laughter drifted from the last of the volunteers cleaning up after the event. The Reed Foundation banner still hung at the far end of the ballroom, its words simple standing beside those who care. Nathan turned off the lights one by one. The hall dimmed until only the reflection of the city filled the glass again. For a moment, he thought of Elena not with longing now, but with gratitude. She had been his mirror, the one who showed him what he refused to see. He stepped outside into the cool night air. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the streets glistening under the soft glow of the street lamps. Somewhere in the distance, a jazz melody floated from a nearby bar, the same kind of song that had once filled the ballroom the night everything began. He walked slowly to his car, not out of fatigue, but out of reverence for the quiet. Sometimes the most beautiful part of a story isn't how it begins or how it ends. It's the pause, the breath between chapters, where forgiveness finally settles in. Nathan had learned that forgiveness wasn't a grand declaration. It was smaller. It lived in the moments you chose not to defend yourself, not to explain, not to blame. It was the calm that came after the storm, when the heart stopped fighting and simply listened. And for him, forgiveness had started with one letter written too late, but still written. As the narrator's voice softens, this story isn't about wealth or betrayal. It's about what we lose when we hide behind pride, and what we find when we dare to speak. It's about a man who mistook control for love, and a woman who taught him that love breathes only in freedom. It's about the quiet cost of silence, and the miracle that happens when silence finally breaks. Nathan's story was never really about business or power or redemption on paper. It was about what happens when we stop calculating and start confessing. When we learn that truth, even when painful, is still a form of care. If you've ever stayed silent to protect yourself, maybe you know what that feels like, the weight of words unspoken, the ache of what could have been said. And maybe, like Nathan, you've built walls so high that you forgot what sunlight feels like. But walls, no matter how thick, are only ever meant to hold us until we're brave enough to step beyond them. He reached his car and paused, his reflection caught in the glossy black window. For the first time in his life, he didn't look away. He whispered quietly, almost as if speaking to the memory of her, "Thank you." Then he opened the door, sat down, and drove through the sleeping city, headlights gliding over rain-slicked streets, music low, steady. The letter she'd once carried still rested in her keepsake box, and though he didn't know it, Elena sometimes reread it on quiet mornings, not to remember pain, but to honor growth. And that was the gift they had given each other, not reconciliation, but recognition. Recognition that love can exist even without possession. That forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken aloud to be real. The narrator's voice deepens with warmth. If there's someone you owe your truth to, call them. Write the letter. Say the words. Don't wait for the perfect time, there isn't one. Because time doesn't heal silence. Honesty does. Maybe your truth is small, a thank you never said, an apology long overdue. Maybe it's as simple as admitting, "I miss you." Whatever it is, say it. Say it before pride builds the kind of distance that love can't cross. Say it before your story becomes a letter never sent. Back at the foundation, the janitor turned off the last light. The glass sculpture, the one Elena had admired, caught a stray beam from the streetlight and shimmered softly, scattering fragments of color across the floor. For a brief moment, it looked alive, like light reborn through broken glass. And maybe that's what forgiveness is: not the absence of cracks, but the beauty that shines through them. Nathan parked by the waterfront and stepped out again, letting the cool breeze roll off the lake. The water moved gently, reflecting the stars above countless small lights shimmering in the dark. He thought about all the people whose lives had touched his: the students, the caregivers, the tired hands that carried others through illness and grief. He thought about how much love the world holds, quietly, invisibly, in the spaces between words. Then he smiled, not the smile of a man who's won, but of one who's finally understood. The wind caught his hair, the water rippled, and the night seemed to breathe with him. The narrator closes softly, like a whisper through the speakers. Some stories end with goodbyes. Others end with understanding. And sometimes, that's enough. So if you're listening now, and there's someone whose silence has lingered between you, don't wait for the right moment. Make it right now. Call them. Tell them what you never said. Because love doesn't live in perfection. It lives in the courage to be seen. The music swells: gentle piano, a single violin note stretching into quiet. And then, silence. Not the kind that isolates, but the kind that soothes. The kind that means peace. The kind that means home. In the end, Nathan and Elena's story isn't just about love. It's about the cost of silence and the courage it takes to be seen. Many of us, especially as we grow older, have learned to protect ourselves behind calm faces and careful words. We call it dignity. But sometimes it's fear. Fear of rejection, of weakness, of saying the wrong thing. Yet the truth is, silence can wound just as deeply as harsh words. Nathan's journey reminds us that control is not strength, and vulnerability is not weakness. To care for someone means to listen, to ask, and to trust that honesty can heal more than perfection ever could. If we've learned anything from his quiet redemption, it's that it's never too late to speak, never too late to apologize, never too late to tell someone they mattered before time turns that truth into regret. So tonight, maybe reach out. Say the words you've held too long, because sometimes the smallest "I'm sorry" or "I see you" can rebuild more than years of silence ever will. That's not just love, that's grace. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched something in your heart, if you saw a piece of your own journey in Nathan or Elena, we'd be deeply grateful if you'd help us share it. Every like, every share, and every subscribe helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life, stories that remind us of kindness, forgiveness, and the quiet strength inside us all. So please, take a moment to support the channel and stay with us for the next story that might just touch your heart in a new way.